Welcome to Collective Protest and Rebellion, a Black Study intensive by the Center for African American Poetry and Poetics at the University of Pittsburgh. It's here where we consider the proposition that art and poetry and radical writing are revolutionary acts. For certain, it's when we practice in the creative mind that we access a reality unknown to us otherwise. Likewise, it's in the experience of visual art, music, dance, film, narrative, and poetry where our interior spaces are altered, allowing us to enter the world as more compassionate, empathetic beings. We borrow from Fred Moten's notion of study when he says, "We are committed to the idea that study is what you do with other people. It's walking, talking, working, dancing, suffering, some irreducible convergence of all three held under the name of speculative practice." We come together differently now. But so many of us were compelled to enter physical space after weeks of pandemic isolation after the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Those protests are Black study. Black study is a deep engagement with others. It's stepping outside of your comfort zone with the kind of courage, as Cornel West says, that looks unflinchingly at catastrophic circumstances and realizes virtues like love and hope and faith. We need speculative practice in order to reach outside of the intolerable and intractable present toward the future we deserve. We are excited to be in community with you.
And we're back.
Yes, we're back. It's day 3 of the CAP Black Study Intensive Collective Protest and Rebellion. I'm Dawn Lundy Martin. I'm the director of CAP. I'm joined here by my fabulous colleague, the novelist, Angie Cruz. Hi, Angie.
Hi.
Angie and I dreamed this week up in the dark days of summer when the coronavirus had us all in deep, deep quarantine. And then the protest happened, and we were trying to figure out how to be in social justice arts community together.
It was and is truly one of the strangest times. But then we figured out that we could do something that we had never done before and that felt invigorating. Like tonight's event, The Sweetness That Survives the Slaughter, with Aracelis Girmay and Zun Lee. It will be able to reach so many more people than if we were hunkered down in one of our not so great auditoriums. Also, we can study with people cross-community, cross-campus, all over the world.
And we can be in practice about what Black study means to us.
How do we bridge the gap between individuals?
Is there a redemptive beauty in the representation of the Black body?
Where in the image, linguistic and or visual, does resistance, refusal lie?
How do poetry and photographic images open up moments for intimacy?
What is the relationship between the archetypal, the stereotypical, and what we create?
Where is Blackness located in diaspora? Anchor or fissure, community or dispersal?
How might we consider geographical space, traveling, the natural world, belonging, and displacement in our storytelling?
Both of our artists tonight are very renowned artists. You can go to our website, www.caapp.pitt.edu, to get their full bios. We're so thrilled to have them. We'll open with Zun Lee, and then Aracelis will read, and I'm going to actually be moderating the conversation, followed by audience Q&A. Feel free to use the chat function to discuss as you listen. And if you want to ask a question, what do?
Hit ask a question button. Please ask questions. We want you to be in conversation with us.
I want to thank all of our sponsors. You can find the information on our website. We want to especially thank the Dietrich School and the Dietrich Foundation, but the sponsors are listed here. Thank you for joining us this evening. And welcome to Aracelis and Zun Lee. Hi, everyone. In the spirit of dynamic art making, we've altered this event slightly since Angie and I recorded the introduction on that glorious day a few weeks ago. Now, Angie will join the event as a co-moderator. We continue to change everything up in the spirit of Fred Moten's doing something different. I also want to mention that I stole the title for this event, and I wasn't sure from whom until recently. The poet scholar Tanya Foster uttered the words, "the sweetness that survives the slaughter," while she was moderating another conversation with Aracelis and another poet at a Cave Canem event. And it turns out that the phrase is actually from a poem by Aracelis herself, but the first incarnation is, "yours is a sweetness to outlast the slaughter." I texted Tanya about this, and she said she borrowed the phrase and put a little turn on it. And her turn was related to a conversation with the scholar Robert Reed Farr and his reference to what survives the hold of the slave ship. I love this traveling of language, so I wanted to mention it at the outset because it actually goes along with the bigger conversation that we've been having all week about language and its power especially when it's morphed. And so when we look back at the original phrase from Aracelis in the poem, we see all this other stuff that comes after bubbling up underneath. Indeed, what emerges from devastation, from nothing, from abject peril, when simply being outside of one's home is a risk? And conversely, when sleeping in your own bed is a risk? What can be created when there is nothing, no safety left? How do we define resistance then? We begin now with images and voiceover by photographer Zun Lee. At first, you'll only hear Jun's voice. So be sure to listen to the images and to Jun. Jun will appear at some point, but we do ask you to pay deep attention to the visual and the oral experience. It helps if you put on headphones for that kind of intimacy. And then we'll all enter into conversation and be elevated by Aracelis' poetry, one mode in which I believe we attend to the notion of consciousness.
Blessings and welcome, everyone. Thank you, Dawn and Angie, Stefan, Alexis, and Daryl for your invitation and support. And thank you to anyone unnamed whose labor made this wonderful week of gatherings happen. I'm really grateful to be in communion with you all during this really intense time, and I hope you're taking care of yourselves. During rehearsals last week, I confessed to Dawn and Aracelis that I really missed the ability to gather in person, and that I wanted today to be something different, as we already mentioned. Not just another Zoom talk about work, but something akin to meeting old friends in a coffee shop or sitting on the stoops and reveling in shared energy. And listening to and learning from everyone this week has definitely felt like that. It was healing and necessary, and I look forward to sharing more of this energy today. Before I begin, I really wanted to shout out two folks in particular. One is one of my long-term mentors, Onaje Allen Gums, who's been my friend for over 2 decades, a jazz pianist, composer, and producer who passed away this April. What made me think of him was Dionne's notion, where she said on Monday, theory is a beating practice for all of us. It has to work for us in our lives. And this idea of the beating practice, imparting a life pulse, a rhythm of possibility, a beat that grounds us and locks us in the pocket. That was really what Onaje's mentorship was for me. Whether it came to music, visual art, writing, any kind of artistic endeavor, he had this thing about incessantly and regularly reminding me and others to stop worrying about what something is or isn't, and really just start thinking about what something does and what something feels like. And so I really miss his ways of theorizing as a beating practice, if you will. The other person I need to reach out to and say thank you is my friend Fred Moulton, who introduced me to the work of Manolo Callahan. Manolo researches conviviality in the context of the Zapatista and other autonomous movements in Greater Mexico. And he asked the question of, how do we renew our habits of assembly? How do we renew our habits of assembly? And assembly not merely as a coming together of people, but a kind of intentional organizing around a collective purpose. And this involves identifying and sharing and reclaiming of knowledge and information, tools to help our community heal and thrive. And in that vein of renewing our habits of assembly, I really want us to think about the question of what is sweetness, and what do we think of when it comes to slaughter, and what survives, or in an operatic sense, how do we survive the unsurvivable and escape the inescapable? And for those of you who know me, I ad nauseum have been citing from a particular book called In the Wake by Christina Sharp for the last 4 or 5 years. And I keep coming back to a particular passage, and I quote, "We are constituted through and by continued vulnerability to this overwhelming force. We are not only known to ourselves and to each other by that force." And this is such a simple but capacious way of thinking through some of the things I want to converse with you today. So I'm going to offer up a series of images as prompts for thought, and each image kind of represents a larger conversation I've had with friends and loved ones during the pandemic. And these conversations have really helped me through some of the rough patches over the last spring and summer, but they've also offered a renewed sense of purpose, or at least a possibility for such discourse. So as we gather in Black study, I'd like for us to think through what it means to not think of Black visual culture as something just to look at and to consume. Listening to images by Tina Kempt comes to mind here, but to really situate ourselves as being one with the image, one with the people in the image, with the maker, and with one another, to really think of us, all of us, not as separate or separable, but thinking of a practice of oneness, if you will, as a kind of work we can engage in to access deeper layers of meaning, different readings of resistance that might not be immediately legible and shouldn't be made so. And we had a wonderful conversation yesterday about illegibility. So I really want to start talking about the first image, which is my favorite image by my favorite photographer, Roy DeCarava. And he made this image called Dancers in 1956. I'll read a quote by DeCarava himself about what his image meant to him. "The photograph was taken at a dance of a social club at the 110th Street Manor at Fifth Avenue. It is about the intermission where they had entertainment, and the entertainment was 2 dancers who danced to jazz music. That's what the image is all about. It's about these 2 dancers who represent a terrible torment for me, and that I felt a great ambiguity about the image because of them. It's because they are, in some ways, distorted characters. What they actually are is 2 Black male dancers who dance in the manner of an older generation of Black vaudeville performers. The problem comes because their figures remind me so much of the real-life experiences of Blacks and their need to put themselves in an awkward position before the man, for the man, to demean themselves in order to survive, to get along. In a way, these figures seem to epitomize that reality, and yet there's something in the figures not about that, something in the figures that is very creative, that is very real and very Black in the finest sense of the word. So there's this duality, this ambiguity in the photograph that I find very hard to live with. I've always had to make a decision in a case like this. Is it good or is it bad? I have to say that even though it jars some of my sensibilities and it reminds me of things I would rather not be reminded of, it is still a good picture. In fact, it is good just because of those things, and in spite of those things, the picture works. Next image, please. So this is a still shot from a short film called Until the Quiet Comes by Khalil Joseph, which he made with Flying Lotus in 2012. And I'm sure many of you have seen this film. Initially, I felt some type of way about reducing such a momentous film to just a still, but this frame is so poignantly in conversation with the previous image and extends the ambiguity that DeCarava spoke about. For those of you who don't know the film is set in the Nickerson Gardens community in Watts, Los Angeles, and the film lays out a visual and sonic landscape that is at once hyper-specific and hyper-local, but at the same time can be pan-diasporically understood as the location where Black life and death, the sweetness and the slaughter, beauty and horror, joy and pain, love and indifference, surveillance and fugitivity aren't just in close proximity, but a part of an ongoing cyclical cosmology. All beginnings have an end, and all that ends gives way to a new beginning. And in fact, time and place themselves seem stunted in this film, suspended or sometimes even reversed. This particular still shot shows Dance's storyboard P. Amazing name for this occasion, actually. And he is the adult manifestation of a young boy who earlier in the film suffers a gunshot and lies in his own blood. And we see storyboard P's body lying on the ground, and then he jerks back into life and onto his feet, removing his blood-soiled t-shirt that says, "J Dilla saved my life." And we see a bullet entry wound briefly glistening in the golden street light. He then glides past the members of his community who kind of seem frozen in time and space and do not interact with him. Finally, at the curb, there's a lowrider awaiting him to take him to the afterworld, decompressing its hydraulics to allow him to squeeze backwards into the back window. For me, the catatonic contortions and the shedding of the shirt don't speak so much to DeCarava's notion of how Black people have to contort themselves before the man. I think here the gesture is more about dance as a ritual, a rite of passage, a way to leave the horrors of the world behind, a kind of liberation and fugitivity that seems only possible in and through death, in abandoning the constraints of the body that keeps us in the hold. But what remains is the possibility of rebirth and transcendence, and a ritual of care that's afforded both in the quotidian, but also in the crossing over into the afterlife. Until the Quiet Comes is a beautiful film to watch for me, but not necessarily an easy film. The scenes of death can be quite jarring, but as with the scenes of joyful everyday Black sociality, they're done with such care and a poetic sense of beauty that affects us to the question of what survives in a way that I feel is both tangible and ineffable at once. Okay, next image, please. So for this one, I took the liberty to juxtapose two images that I feel are in direct conversation with one another. On the right is Graduation, another image by Roy DeCarava that he made in 1949, and which ended up in The Sweet Flypaper of Life, the famous collaboration by DeCarava and Langston Hughes, which was first published in 1955. And on the left, we have Gordon Parks' widely known image of Joanne Thornton Wilson and her niece, Shirley Ann Kirksey, standing in front of a theater in Mobile, Alabama in 1956, from a body of work that I think was later published as The Segregation Story. Why I put these two frames together and what I think these frames share is sort of a depiction of the everyday brutality and structural inequality of Jim Crow America, but without having to depict a violent antagonism. In fact, I think it is this gentle but assured matter-of-factness with which the women insist themselves into their oppressive surroundings that create a powerful narrative without having to explain or justify it. For instance, just look at the lady in DeCarava's frame as she sort of gently lifts her dress so it won't get soiled, or the effortless elegance of Joanne and Shirley Ann in Park's photograph. Both produce a kind of dignity that's already presumed to be imminent and not contested and not a need to be earned or redeemed. And the other question I wanted to raise by putting those two shots together is, what does it mean for both photographers at different times and in different places to realize the respective gravity of this moment when they saw what they saw unfolding with sort of a mise-en-scène-like deliberateness? What influenced both Parks and DeCarava to ascertain something specific in excess of the immediately visual? What gestures towards the something more than how we are known to ourselves and to each other by that force?
It's so interesting not knowing a lot about the photos and looking at them before you're talking through them. Because when I looked at the first image by DeCarava, I was really interested in, I didn't kind of recognize the awkwardness as much as I recognized the ecstasy. I was thinking of it in terms of the ecstatic body, meaning more than joy. I was thinking about the total involvement of the subject or person and what it in the moment of dance, or from the Greek, the mystically absorbed. And then I was thinking about the context of the 1950s, and the state violence that's rising up that continues in this long moment of state violence, and what it takes for a body to move toward that ecstasy. So I was juxtaposing those two notions, as opposed to the awkwardness seemed as if it were about an absolute involvement in the experience of the body for me when I saw the photo. So it's interesting to have that added reading, around the awkwardness, and then the context for the film still too, that awkwardness actually emerges from the battery of the body, of the Black body.
Right.
Yeah, that's not really a question, but it's just a noticing. I'm curious as to what Angie and Aracelis are thinking about some of these images and what's been said so far.
I'm just very moved. I should begin there. Moved as in rearranged, and I feel thankful for that. And also am carrying a sorrow of that. Those two dancers dancing, Zun, how you described the fingers. That's kind of what I can't stop thinking about, and not just that. In the frame, the clothes on the figure, so that there's I'm thinking about clothes and adornment, but how the clothes show the bodies in them, but also I wonder how much space the body takes up in those clothes, which I want to think more about, but that question of there's a question that's emerging for me, which has something to do with what we are inside and how it fits or does not fit. That first image in particular makes me think about.
And
well, I wanted to say, like, it's first, thank you for sharing these images. And I have so many things, like, I'm moved as well by the images and the reading of the way you're reading those images. And last night I was reading an interview with you, Aracelis, where you were saying about your writing. You said, I want to learn by these poems. And I kind of thought about what that could mean to walk along with your own work, but also walk along with works we love, and the generosity in certain works. And when you were talking about being one with the image over consuming Black culture, but instead actually being one with the image, as if we can walk along these images and sort of experience them. Those are the thoughts I'm having right now, in a moment where I feel like so much of Black culture is like being consumed in a way, and artists feel like they're being consumed because we're in trend. And to look at these images so closely and with such love is to me like such a beautiful gesture, and I'm grateful, and I want to revisit them as soon as we end this talk so I could think more about it. Yeah.
And I just want to say one last thing about the image that is on my left, the colored entrance and the woman and the girl beneath. Makes me think, I've been doing a lot of research for my own memoir about Black female respectability. And this kind of like in the kind of being compelled in one way to prove one's own kind of both gendered identity as a woman by also, it is both real and performed, this kind of, middle class respectability, beauty, in contrast to what is being said women cannot be. And so right under that colored entrance, especially the isolation from the very thing that one is seeking, and then the performance of it at the same time. And I see it in the Gordon Parks too. So thank you for bringing these images. This is our brief commentary. We will move back to Zun Lee.
Great, and thank you. Actually, I'm glad you mentioned respectability, because there is another image coming up later which kind of speaks to that as well. So I'm glad you kind of referenced that. Okay, next image. So this is another still from a film, and as you can probably sense now, I'm really inspired by moving images more so than still images, but I see still images kind of as I watch films, and this is a still from one of the most trenchant vignettes from Killer of Sheep by Charles Burnett, which is still my favorite film of all time. And it's a single take enacted, I think it was a single take enacted to the equally trenchant This Bit of Earth, sung by Dinah Washington. And, so much to say about this film, and I know Julie and Charles are in conversation on Friday, and I can't wait for that. But in this scene, the protagonist, Stan, and his wife are dancing arm in arm, and Stan's wife kind of makes amorous advances that Stan rejects, and eventually he, once the song ends, he pushes his wife away and leaves, and the wife kind of recoils in despair. But there's so much more in the scene beyond just the heart-wrenching intimate study of unrequited desire and rejection and yearning and disappointment. We, at the end of the song, we hear the arm of the record player lift as the song ends, and the noise of children laughing and playing outside as the woman soliloquizes her childhood memories. She talks about her growing up in the South and how much she misses certain things about her grandmother, if I remember correctly. And she holds her daughter's crib shoes tight to her chest. So there's so much more than just sort of the obvious sort of heartache and despair that the scene kind of wrestles with. Every second is really imbued with so much attentiveness and tenderness and care that the abject quotidian reality of Watts' LA doesn't ever feel degrading or dehumanizing. These are people with rich and complete inner lives, and this film kind of makes it a point not to have to humanize the obvious. It's sort of like, what does it mean, or what is possible in the hands of a maker who knows how to feel deeply, and how to convey that deep feeling to us. Again, belaboring Christina Sharp's quote, how else are we known to ourselves and to each other? Next image. So since we talked about respectability, and at the same time we talked about rich and interesting, complex, and emotional inner lives, this is another still from another movie, a film called Pariah by Dee Reese, made in 2011. And this is a really wonderful coming-of-age narrative of Alike, a young same-gender loving woman in Fort Greene, Brooklyn. And again, it's, I don't want to sort of give away the plot of this film, but why I chose this film as a reference is that I really loved how the complexity of the protagonist's life world is allowed to unfold. Her navigation of identity, sexuality, gender, and gender norms. We talked about clothing and performance around clothing, and this film is really rich when it comes to those things. Coming to selfhood as a woman and as a writer, kinship, intergenerational and family conflict. And, this is a lot to take on for a film, it seems, but all of this is handled again with such, empathy and tenderness and sort of a focus on interiority that never seems heavy-handed or exoticizing. Compare and contrast to another film that made its way around the cinemas. Also starting with a P, that kind of tells a bit of a different story. But I love what Jerome yesterday said, when he referenced the metaphor of the seed, that notion of a self-contained universe and everything within itself. And, it's sort of a context within which nothing has to be explained or over-explained. And for me, it was important to see a film that presents itself as such a self-contained universe, not in response to or explaining something to people that are not part of this environment. Also, shout out to Bradford Young and his cinematography, lighting, color science. All of this is in direct conversation with Roy DeCarava's aesthetic. Really foregrounding darkness not just as an absence of light, and kind of really thinking through what it means to correctly and accurately and beautifully light black skin in film. And that in itself is a whole conversation around resistance when you think about, what it means for photographers and filmmakers to use inherently racist film and camera technology to accurately reflect black skin. But why this film popped back into my head is, is really the final poem Alike delivers as both a confessional and a declaration. This idea of brokenness and becoming, or brokenness as becoming. Being broken not as something to be fixed, but kind of rupturing open, a debridement, making way for something new, something freeing, something healing. And, I'm just going to let the poem speak for itself. So I'm quoting this poem right now. Heartbreak opens onto the sunrise, for even breaking is opening, and I am broken, I am open. Broken into the new life without pushing in, open to the possibilities within, pushing out. See the love shine in through my cracks, see the light shine out through me. I am broken, I am open, I am broken open. See the love light shining through me, shining through my cracks, through the gaps. My spirit takes journey, my spirit takes flight. Could not have risen otherwise, and I am not running, I am choosing. Running is not a choice from the breaking. Breaking is freeing, broken is freedom. I am not broken, I am free.
Thank you so much, Zun Lee. I want to say that hearing you talk about these images and seeing them just brings me to the very real place that we're in, right? It's kind of like I can hear in all of our voices a kind of almost repressed emotion, I guess, because we are all experiencing in this particular moment of layered crises, like a kind of fragility. And then we bring ourselves into these spaces and we try to, kind of prop ourselves up for the performance or something like that. But what I'm really kind of unable in this moment after hearing you talk, deal with the performance of it. And just to say, I feel that fragility in myself and that kind of brokenness in myself. And also the reserves of whatever that other thing is that won't let go, just kind of rising up,
Mm-hmm.
So I want to thank you. We will, do you want to make a remark before we transition?
That was perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll return to you in a little bit. Now I will introduce very briefly Aracelis Girmay, whose work, one of the notable things, there are many notable things about Aracelis's work, but one of the things I love about it is that she refuses to make it singular, even when the I is speaking. It is a communal work, and she's always accessing and bringing folks from the past up into that work and paying homage to not only the folks who've come before her, like personally and life ancestors, but also the people who've come before us all, who've made this particular moment and our reserve, I guess, possible. So I'm pleased to welcome Aracelis to the screen.
Thank you so much, Dawn and Zun and everyone. As Zun said earlier, all of the people who I have not named, Angie, Stefan, Derek, Alexis, all the hands, all the hours. And also thank you, Dawn, for what you said about the feeling, the fragility, and also the other thing that is holding on and steady with us. I keep thinking about Kamau Brathwaite describing after the death of his beloved wife, describing it as a time of salt. And I just want to say that it has been a time of salt for me and for so many of us, among other things. But I was very moved. I am very moved, and to be in conversation with you all, and to listen to the photographs and your voice and thinking, Zun. And so what I did, I just have a stack of things beside me. And so I was trying to listen for what of these things in my stack might surface in response as a way of listening back. And so I wanted to read first this poem by Lucille Clifton called Wind on the St. Mary's River, January 2002. It is the elders trying to return, sensing the coast is near and they will soon be home again. They have walked under 2 oceans and too many seas, the nap of their silver hair whipping as the wind sings out to them, this way. This way. And they come rising steadily, not swimming exactly toward shore, toward redemption. But the wind dies down, and they sigh and still and descend, while we watch from our porches, not remembering their names, not calling out Jeremiah, Fannie Lou, Geronimo, but only white caps on the water. Look, white caps. This is a section of a longer poem that I wrote that is in this section. I am thinking about this visit with my aboy Haile, who has since passed, my grandfather's brother, in Adisogdo, which is an ancestral home on my father's side. And I was thinking, I'm looking at my notes. I don't know if it was you, Jun, or you, Dawn, or you both, but somebody mentioned something that made me think, oh, your bone is my bone. This question of feeling at times so separate from another, and this insistence of my aboy that you think you're so far over there, but we are the same thing. Beloveds, beneath the surface of your last place, the tiny oblivious fishes form wreaths above the seagrasses and their long reach. Some mornings in my own city far away, I run to greet you, come to me as sea and carry myself out into your long, dark time, like a child meeting its older cousins. I touch your teeth and give you the single word of my body. I am a woman, again at the side of Aboy Haile's bed. Aboy, who is 96. He is brushing my acacia hair. He is holding my arm. He says, moving his hand to mean all around us, that this is my home. He means Adisogdo, but he also means the world. Though I think in America that I am there and he is here, that we are different or far, really, we are each other. My bones are your bones, he says. His teeth are my teeth, and my smiling is his smiling. He holds my arm tight until it is a stone, a bone. He smooths my hair with force. I am a horse. The long dark skin of the water. The talking aboy of the water. The brushing back my acacia hair. Washing my face. When we are done, I cross the sea back into air and return to the traffic of the streets I know. I am marked by the dead, your sea letters of salt and weeping. Now I am ready to lay myself down on the earth, to listen to the instructions for how to talk of love and land, to sing of home in the horrible years, and to fill my language like the stars do with the light, anyway, of a future tense. This poem is a newer poem. I think it's called Placenta Shed My, and it feels like it's carrying some of the same questions of the last two poems I read, and also that it's facing a slightly different direction, thinking of this question of what we are able to carry inside us that remains mysterious to us, and remembering, looking back at the placenta of that I made. Was it me? And thinking, oh my God, kind of being astonished and alarmed by its powers. And it felt as if it was an ancestor that had come rushing out of me, speechless with exertion. And I thought, look what all our labor and blood and quiet made. Placenta shed my lichen, my book, my organ, my slop, your cake, my slab, our moss and I and sack of meat on which the baby fed from me who was not me. Then rode away inside her own horses, lovingly was shooed. My garden nest, that realm, my stray and matted hair, your gut and veils, your hoodmo room of minerals and weight, my flea and struggle, table, my splay at which we met in darkness, though I left you there, my sorry, desiccated by hospital light. Grandmother, my dog, following our child out, though you knew the air would kill. Elder, my elder, but also the baby and baby twin, her mother, her me, her meadow of wild flowers who, when I had no hands, no mind, took care of her and made her live. I too am built out of a question about the sky, a body bearing things ordinary as light. And when I realized this, I was on my back, my legs in the stirrups, and the lights of the technician's office were dimmed as she slid the wand up inside me after, like a room, the baby emptied me. And space is what I thought. As the technician clicked her machine for a close-up here and there, which was really all me, and the seeming limitlessness of my body's dark. How did I spend so many years dismarveling the body, its powers and beauties, thinking the world a place I did not belong to, thinking myself alien, though of course it was always ever my only home. And in that room, my heart then had a brazen dream and drew with its brown fingers its own curtains back, so that I could see the courtyard inside it, where the peacocks swept the dirt with the dark of their closed tails, within which the green burned secretly like a fever. And I saw my 6 words and their ghosts, and the mothers nodding from beneath the pepper tree, and a well at the center of the yard of my heart. And I held the dead given pail, so lowered it down into my chest, then up, and like that was taught by the elders to lift sorrow out from my sorrow. This poem wants only the moon in its hair and the boy on the roof. This boy on the roof of this poem with a moon in his heart, splayed and sighing as a star in my arms. Maybe he will be the boy who studies stars. And I'll just close with this one. Body of sight, body of breaths, body of trying. Beloved, today you eat, today you bathe, today you laugh, today you walk, today you read, today you paint, my love, today you study stars, today you write, today you climb the stairs, today you run, today you see, today you talk. You cut the basil, you sweep the floor, and as you chore, touch the ankles and hairs of your befores, who look up from their work in the field or at the chisel, to tell you in their ways you live. Thank you.
Ooh. Let us invite Zun into the room as well. Zun, please. And take a moment. Let's take a moment. Angie, we're going to turn to you for the first question. I lied before.
Okay.
I need to just gather myself.
God, thank you, Aracelis. Thank you. I mean, I've been spending the past few days with all of you and your work and listening to you and, and thinking of Zun Lee, like what you've asked us is how do we create an intimate space? And I think of what Jerome was saying yesterday about intimacy, bringing the publicness and the quashi sense of bringing, this space where we're rehearsed, but we're also improvising or opening ourselves to the things that we don't know can happen or will happen. And it makes me incredibly nervous because I don't, I want to be honest in this space and really just feel everything that's going on. So I'm just going to share. Last night I started doing your prompt, Aracelis, that you offered everyone because I'm having all my students do it. And when you first said that you were thinking about listening, I thought, oh, listening. Yeah, I could be a better listener. And this really simple way I thought of it. And then I actually did the exercise where it was midnight and I spent 5 minutes quiet in my room. My son was sleeping. And in your exercise, you ask to sit still and like invite the visitors to come and to listen to them. And it could be a memory, or it could be an object, it could be a sound. And the things that emerge in those 5 minutes were actually surprising. And there were some things that I said, go away. I don't want this visiting. I don't want this visitor. I resisted. And then you said, go take a drink of water. So I went ahead and I drank some water, and I did it again. And, and at first the practice of listening, I was like, oh, I hear the sirens in the distance. I feel the breeze coming in from the west. There was a rainstorm coming in New York City. And then again, the memories that I didn't want to visit, this ache in my chest, the knot. And I was like, oh, no, I don't want to do that, So I was thinking about, I wanted to ask you, and I think this is also connected to Jung, some of the things you talk about, like oneness with work or being in the world and community in a way, and being open to the visitor, right? How is this practice of listening that you said you've been thinking about more lately impacted or influenced your work in this recent moment? Does that make sense?
Is that a question?
And where do you resist?
For?
And where for Aracelis, if you're ready to speak, and Dawn even, and where do you resist? Yeah, are there spaces of resistance? Yeah.
That does make sense to me as a question. And it's hard to answer, I think, for me right now, where I feel like the things when they visit, like, for example, I'm thinking about after I have two young kids who are 3 and 5, and since they were both born, I have felt like differently vulnerable to my imagination and to what I know of history, and have felt like when you hear this, you might hear a child crying for nothing much, like for the playground, not being able to go to the play, but like suddenly I'm like, all the cries that have sounded like that, and for what? Like there's a way that I've felt, perhaps hormonally, but also maybe just feeling differently vulnerable in the world, where I've felt like I've had to really practice turning my imagination turning towards green in my imagination, or towards blackness or night in my imagination, which feel like things that they feel like possibility, and not just possibility, but like the powers and beauties of possibility. And so there's a way that I feel like I've, in one way, and I don't know if this answers what you're speaking to, Angie, but I have felt like when I feel teetering towards despair, like there's an imaginative strategy, to borrow from Toni Morrison, or practice, that is an awareness of that, and a thinking and wondering about that and asking questions, but also knowing those imaginative strategies of others can help me to remember. I've been thinking about how to think like a maroon, how to think like a poet, which could mean many things, but for me, to reorient myself or my imagination towards what other else might nourish me.
Yeah.
I mean, there's something too in what I hear you saying about listening to oneself. Like, I think that's like the most difficult thing for me anyway, I'll speak for myself, is to sometimes listen to my own interior, listening to my own kind of non-linguistic knowledge or something like that in order to get to some other place. And I think that my go-to mode is to think a lot, right? And to kind of like be an analysis or to try to fix something. And the moment that I am able to stop thinking, I say this to my students all the time, kind of like writing poetry is in part like not thinking, to turn off that thinking mode in order to enter into some other way of listening to that part of oneself that you can only access in a kind of almost, I want to call it trance, something approximating trance, in order to pull out that language that you didn't even know was there. And I think that this is particularly true when it comes to grief, because grief has no language. And so when we attempt to approximate or get at or something, right? So it has no natural language. We have to access some other place in order to get to something that feels as if it's tending to it in a way that doesn't reduce and squash it down. June, what are your thoughts? I'm going to pronounce your name in like 17 different ways this whole time. So
Remember, Junebug is sort of the way to connote the longing. So feel free to call me that. But I like what you gesture towards in terms of, as we listen and we attune to and connect us to what the stories are that we tell ourselves and that we embody to survive. Then the question becomes, what is the work that we consciously or unconsciously do to make it so? That we not only tell each other over and over again, but that kind of resonate within the space of sort of that irreducibility that you just mentioned. Why I'm so shook right now is, there's beauty and there's a particular thing that happened this week, and I thought, I don't know how this fits into this talk, and I didn't actually ever think I would mention it to anybody, but the mentor that I referenced earlier in my giving thanks, Onaje, he last year, he and I sat down and kind of just reminisced over our 20 years of kind of gathering and being together and listening, the speeding practice, and he, we're sitting there reminiscing and kind of going through our little Rolodex, if you will, of oh, what about this person? I haven't talked to that person in a minute. What about that person? Oh, she's still around, but we haven't really touched base. And so we're just going through all of our contexts. And, we realized a lot of people are dead. And as we keep going through our internal Rolodex, we're realizing we're pretty much the only two that are still around from that circle from that began about 20 years ago. Right. And so, and Onaje looked at me and he said, but hey, you and I made it, right? And I was just so consumed in my grief and the realization that, the regret of not reaching out to people and it now being too late, that I said, no, Angie, we didn't make it. We didn't make it. And then he shook his head and Angie grabbed my arm really firmly and looked me in the eyes and said, I said, we made it. We all made it. There's no more pain. There's no more suffering. We all made it, right? And so there's kind of like a gathering up of, like not ending up in despair, if you will, or a notion of disabusing ourselves of the notion that making it has to be tied to a bodily survival, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So and thinking that the person who reminded me so intently is no longer around himself now, but still has this speeding practice with which he influences me, and then has this habit of revisiting me. And I feel like today, through Aracelis' poems, he's revisiting me yet again, right? So, and in our gathering at the coffee table, if you will. So for me, it's been a reminder of what the work really is, whether it's through writing or poetry or a picture making, whatever your practice might be. The work is not the end result. The work is really in remembering what we have together, and that we are not separate. So
you're making me think, Zun, of yesterday, something that Jerome said when talking about Alice dancing in the box. And he said, he talked about the expansive force of Alice, which made me start to think something I've never thought quite in that way before, which was that, there's the box and dancing within the box, but the idea of thinking about or feeling into the expansive force is not it just is, like, regardless of whether it breaks through a box or stays in the box, but that expansive force, however legible or illegible or like perceivable it might be or might not be, is, I don't like, that is, I've been thinking about it all day.
I've been thinking a lot about Sadia's rage from yesterday. And this conversation just makes me think about all of the things that we hold simultaneously, right? It's no wonder that there's sometimes like a fracturing or a feeling of breaking or brokenness or something that where all of these things, all of, rage, grief, also attempting to experience joy, which I think is necessary for life, right? We're forced to kind of grapple emotionally in this particular moment with all of it at once. I want to, before we go back to Zun, I actually want to ask a question about, this is continuous from the conversation that we've been having all week. I'm interested to hear what you both think about language. We've been talking a lot about how it fails and when it gets sucked of meaning and what's redeemable and by what means. And which brings me to two obvious facts, which is, Aracelis, you work primarily, I think, maybe you have other artistic practices that I don't know about in the realm of language. And Zun, your work is primarily in the realm of the photograph, as far as I know. And we've also been talking about the metaphor all week. And when I think of the metaphor in poetry, I think of it as a kind of traveling through toward a new understanding or a new take on an old understanding. And I'm going to quote you, Aracelis, from your poem from Kingdom Animalia. And it's called Running Home, I Saw the Planets. That's the name of the poem. This is towards the end. I can't stop touching my heart and saying, today is my birthday, you see. For the beautiful clamor of planets dressed as girls who running home have heads, whose heads swing black night, running home on the black feet of horses from the rain. It's gorgeous. I love it feels revolutionary, the evolving thought in the metaphor. And I was thinking too about the images that you work with, Jean, and I think when people look at a photograph, they think that they're experiencing a kind of transparency, which is very different from the way that people think about images in poetry. And I was listening to a talk or an interview that you were giving, June, where you say something about being drawn to people, that you're seeing something that draws you to them, something ineffable, perhaps. And then you take the photograph, I would guess with their permission. And so I was hoping that you could say a few words before we transition back to some more of the images you'll present, just about this work that we do in the areas of images, and where in those linguistic or visual images does refusal or resistance exist for you? Because I think that the reason that we do this work has to do with something that helps us deal with what I was talking about before, which is all of that holding that we're forced to do, right?
Yeah. And for me, it's something. I'm just going through my notes from yesterday or the day before, but I think it was the darkness of whiteness is no longer the lens through which the work is done. I think it was this idea, and this idea of the plan for our obliteration sounds like a plan to do right by us. So this if you think about representation, and we hinted at that earlier, and representation in the broadest sense, this notion that representation is something redemptive or positive or valuable, or that it articulates a kind of weapon in the fight for equality or equity, justice. People say representation matters, but in the vein of neoliberal extractivism, accessing our affect and our attention, and now profiting from representation, and we're delivering all of this representation to the man for free. I really want to question this notion of representation mattering. To whom does it matter? To us, because we have this desire to see ourselves, which in itself is a construct that isn't just something that people naturally do, but it had to be a construct that was invented. That representation of the self matters. People now want to ascribe it as a human quality, but it actually had to be invented in the Middle Ages in Europe as a thing, to individuate yourself. And now we're holding on to that very tool that kills us as a way to articulate our freedom fight. So for me, the refusal that you gestured at is more sort of a refusal of the refusal, or, if you will, like something that Fred mentioned earlier, sort of a refusal to engage them in their game, or negate the negation, if you will. Kind of when they say we are nobody and we are not to be represented, we have no subjectivity. The response, or the way I structure my response, is not to respond to that and say, no, we are somebody, but to refuse their right to define us, so and to not make their opinion or their subjectivity on us matter when making work, so it's kind of like this thing that Toni Morrison talks about when she says she had to strike a black subjectivity immediately, and to make sure that there's no confusion around who she's talking to or talking with. So it's the same way with photography, like it's who can look at this work? Anyone. But who is this work for is a very different question, right? So, and then for me, it's always important that first and foremost, the people that I work with, who are not my subjects, if you will, see themselves in the way that they want to be seen, and so, that's sort of the first level of approval, if you will, beyond just the formal consent, not necessarily, is this a good picture or not, but do the people like themselves in it? Do they feel that this picture tells them something about themselves. And so this is really taking me out of the equation in a way, in terms of, as an agent or as a maker. And it's more so the act of witnessing or witnessing, if you will. That's sort of more the role that I feel that I inhabit in this space.
I'm thinking about this idea when she talked about the rant, and also Jerome, the horse. I don't know where that note is.
Stutter is a horse, I think, something like that. Yeah.
Stutter is a horse outrunning government, or I'm getting that wrong. I'm gonna find it before we close. But the ongoing nature of when I think about the rant, the force of it and the ongoingness of it makes me think too about, in this conversation, about when I was a kid, I could look forever at my grandmother had this little tiny garden in her apartment complex patio, and I could just sit forever facing that dirt. It was small, but it was like the pincher bugs and the dirt. It was like you could read it forever. And I think about Kamal Brathwaite talking about watching this woman sweeping, and it's sweeping the yard, the sand, and this image stays with him, and he is like reading that image over years and time, and thinking about her sweeping the ocean, and thinking about the Middle Passage, and I'm thinking about the work of, for me, the practice of language, and what metaphor in language helps me to do, and helps make possible for me as a person, is that I think it feels like it can't be exhausted. Like the kinship between things is ongoing, and can be ongoing if we stay for long enough with a thing or with someone, and keep wondering and changing with it. And that feels like what metaphor is for me.
Someone posted in the chat on Crowdcast, they say that the quote is, "Stutter is a horse for speech." Something like that, I think. We'll see. We'll look at the recording. So I'm wearing two hats tonight. I usually do this in the chat for us, but I'll just ask you, and everyone can see the seams. Zun, we're turning to you again. Do you want to go to the video clip, or do you want to talk about the last two images? We are about 20 minutes from the end of the show. Or do you want to do both, and then we can go straight to Q&A?
Yeah, why don't we talk about both images together, and then we can still show the clip. So
okay, great.
And I'll make it short.
All right.
So the next image, or the next two images, are really my final images that I wanted to talk about, which is yet another Flying Lotus collaboration. This time with Kendrick Lamar and their 2014 video "Never Catch Me," and it has a lot of similarities to the Khalil Joseph film. It also deals with, sort of the proximity of life and death. But this is very much this sort of breaking open kind of rupture that we talked about. It's, just briefly for those that haven't seen the film takes us to a church where folks are gathered for a wake for a young girl and young boy. Both suddenly jump out of their casket and disembark and begin to engage in a joyful, exuberant, energetic dance. They swirl around each other and themselves, and they dance past the adults in the church and leave them behind in a sort of frozen, mournful stasis. And as they run outside the church, they're joined by other children who are playing in the yard. And the boy and girl eventually continue dancing and then climb into a hearse and drive off with the other children running behind them as the camera pans out. And the final moment, maybe you could talk, switch to the next image. The final moment after all this explosion and detonation of joy is, sort of again, a very quiet inward turn, if you will, the boy looking out of the hearse and kind of very deliberately enjoying the gentle evening breeze as it sort of caresses his face, right? So, and for me, this is really kind of the epitome of what, sweetness and slaughter can do, in juxtaposition, but not necessarily in response to each other. When I talk about this video in class or with others, there's sometimes some confusion. People are like, well, the kids are dead, aren't they? Are they still dead? Did they resurrect? And for me, then, I'm trying to kind of purposefully not engage in the question of are they dead or not, but does it actually matter in this context? Again, back to the earlier question of what survives, or what survives the slaughter, and it's this joyful sociality that cannot be broken, that cannot be reduced. For me, that really marks this video as sort of something I wanted to bring to the table here.
Wonderful. So thank you. Let's look at the clip from Kevin Kwashi. And we'll just go, I guess, backstage for that, and then we'll all come back on for discussion and Q&A.
And yet, what goes uncommented upon in this image is, if you look closely, how both of these men have their heads bowed, and one of them has his eyes closed. It's almost as if they are in prayer. What strikes me about this is how there's a balance between the intense political gesture of the protest they were making, and for sure it was a protest, as many of the athletes at the Olympics, some of them US Americans, but some of them athletes from around the world, were using the Olympic stage as a chance to make a statement. But there's a balance between that and this intimacy, this almost gesture of their inner lives that's reflected in the posture they strike. And why is it, for all of the people who've been moved by this image, that so few people have noticed or at least commented on this quality? That's what brings me to this question of quiet. One of the reasons it's so easy to miss the intimacy of Smith and Carlos's gesture is because of the common ways in which we come to think of Black culture. Black culture is dramatic, expressive, loud, colorful, even resistant. Resistance has been such an important part of Black movements for freedom. And so we have this common language of thinking about Blackness through what one might call the public discourse. And it's this that so dominates one's thinking about Black culture that leads to us missing what else might be there in Smith and Carlos's gesture. And quiet is important as a term because it's distinguished from silence. Though commonly we tend to use the two terms as if they are synonyms, they're quite different, at least in the way that I try to think of them. Silence is the absence of something, or the repression of something, the stillness of something. Quiet is different. Quiet can be expressive. It's a habit of being, a quality of inwardness, much more characteristic of the interior than silence. Quiet is expressive in the way that one can say a song or a poem is quiet. The architecture of a building is quiet, but one couldn't say that about silence. It is important to remember that quiet is about expressiveness, but an expressiveness that generates from somewhere inside, from that wild, ranging, voluptuous inner life that we all have. Quiet is inevitable and essential in humanity. And in that way, it's different from the repression that's often characterized in silence. So if we come back to that image of Smith and Carlos with that concept of quiet, that notion of that wild, voluptuous, vibrant inner life in our minds, it's a little bit easier for us to see something more than only resistance, to see and imagine their hearts aflutter. It's easier for us to imagine a whole world of things that they might be thinking or feeling in this moment, in addition to the expressed political message that they surely intended. And all of a sudden, this moment, which is already so powerful, becomes a little bit more powerful, a little bit more moving, as if we are seeing more and more of their humanity come into view. It stuns us how sublime they are, how beautiful these two human beings are, and we can see that humanity more richly. It is as if the concept of quiet and this notion of interiority allows us to see some of the human dignity that might be passed over if we only think of them through a discourse of resistance. And I think the idea of quiet could help expand how we think about many other aspects of Black history, how we think about those iconic moments that so define for us the 19th and the 20th and the 21st century, how we read and think about Black literature. Quiet is an invitation to go beyond resistance as a frame for thinking about Black culture, and to see and understand and explore that human dignity that is inevitable in all life.
Wow, I love that juxtaposed against the images that you talked about right before. I want to just point out to everyone in the audience that if you go to the CAP website, Zun has a creative prompt on our website that's related to Kwashi's notions of quiet and interiority. So, and then a link to the full video. We'll have a little bit more discussion, and then we'll turn to some really great questions from the audience. I think we'll run a few minutes over, if that's okay. Angie.
So yeah, I'm like, my brain, everything, so much is happening at once. First, I'm still stuck on Zun when you talked about making it, right? It's not even a question I prepare, but it reminds me of what something Sadia said yesterday, where she said, do we want to be the inheritors of the big house? And I always think about, what are we working for when we think about representation? You know, right after the beautiful conversation, I decided to watch the debate, and I was like, these are not my people. And I shut it down. I was like, these are not my people. This is not the conversation I want to be in. How do we decenter that conversation, when in the reality is that a lot of our work, you know, when we talk about consumption, it's being curated or presented toward institutions that are predominantly white, you know, that are not my people. Like, in thinking of where I want my work to go, it's not always that place. So, and thinking of making it, I'm like, that is the inherited language that creates narratives for us that trap us, right, in a way. And to break out, right, like the breaking open and breaking out is so important. And these conversations are really like opening me up to thinking about even what quiet means. You know, I spent a lot of time with Kevin Kwashi thinking about quiet, and going back to what Sadia said, where she says, I write to hold on to my sanity, but maybe more to hold on to my madness. Like, can that quiet space also be that wild interior that we all have inside of us, that includes joy and grief and madness? And, you know, that really, going back even to Toni Morrison in 1975, when she said that beautiful thing around, like, you know, it's not that, you know, someone would imagine the Black body to be inhuman, or not capable. It's that they don't want us to imagine our capacity or live our fullest ambition. Because if we do that, it's, you know, what happens when we can occupy that space? So, Mike, you know, I'm thinking all these things, and I'm like, thinking about also what Erica Hunt said yesterday, and she said, the end of the world has been on repeat, right? And I think about that. And, you know, and Angela Davis recently, I heard her say, someone had asked her, oh, does anything feel different to you right now, right? When we think, if we're not going to inherit this world, there's obviously rebellion happening in the world. And she said, yes, something does feel different about this moment. So my question to you both, in a personal way, in the world way, what do you see as possibilities for change? Or is there a difference within your spheres of influence or what you're experiencing right now? Like, do you feel difference? Do you see possibility for change? Is that it? I know it's all over the place, but I have a lot of thoughts.
Given all of that Angie articulated, that undergirds the question. Consider it all.
Yes, all of it. Pick and choose from where you want. You know, it's not a lot of time, so I thought I would throw it all out at the same time.
We are in a coffee shop, so just
anything could happen. I don't know.
Please, I'm happy to.
I mean, I could say you're making me think right now, which is that I'm thinking about Audre Lorde, Litany for Survival, which I've read for many, many years and haven't read maybe since the pandemic. I have not read it, but you know, after losing my father recently, I thought I was hearing we were never meant to survive. I've been hearing that part of the poem and thinking, and again, I haven't looked at it on paper, but it has been coming and coming back. That's the phrase. And I felt differently. Oh, and there's something, I don't even know if I can articulate it here, but there's some sharpening that's doing for me. Like I think I would have been afraid of that. I think there was more fear in hearing those lines even months ago. And I think I didn't quite hear the poem as I'm hearing it now, which is like, so maybe that's not the point, right? Like, I mean, there's the possibility, which, what does that mean to survive at all? But also feeling like, you know, I want to live. I want my children to live. And also, by what term? Like, how do we live in joy? How do I go outside even though I'm afraid to go outside, and feeling like, go, you know, you must, because we were never meant to survive. Like, how do you step out of that sentence into the world? And there's a way that it's giving me courage that I think I did not feel I had access to. I'm kind of all over the place. I feel a constellation of things, but I don't know. What are you guys thinking?
Oh, this is actually kind of just this describes sort of how I'm navigating this space right now, because on the one hand, everything right now is overwhelming. It seems like all of it comes at you at once, but I'm of a certain age where nothing is new, and nothing is, you know, this is not some Aristotelian plot that has a beginning, middle, and an end. It's just like ongoing, right? Like, it's just like this one thing, and this is not like events on a plot line. It's just like this, like, so everything is new and everything feels the same and everything feels familiar, and so in that sense, it's kind of you know, this notion that nothing, while nothing is new, it still exhausts the F out of us, right? So and so all of these engaging moments with friends, or there's a lot of heart and love and brain power that's coming together this week. And I would urge people, whether they're students or not, to not just think of it as a coming together of theory, or was this whole idea of all study is practice, but not all practice is study. So I really want to, and this is coming just straight from my experience, that people kind of tend to dismiss intellectualizing or reading books or certain frameworks as just sort of stuff that maybe survives a semester in a classroom but has no practical applicability. And I would really urge for people to think about these things as blueprints for survival. So when Christina Sharp talks about wake work, this is a blueprint for survival. When Stydia talks about critical fabulation, this is a blueprint for survival. This is not just to get an A on a term paper, but there's concrete clues and cues inside that really point towards the question of like, what do we do in this time when we were not meant to survive? And so this practice of study is really to really reinforce the notion that we're all coming together to not just theorize and wax poetic, but to really get at some answers that we can apply today, the next day, and the next day after, as we continue to face trauma. So, and so there's this tendency to sort of look at intellectual labor as not material to our survival, and I want to really offer that it is. So.
I love what you said about things feeling the same. It's the same, but it's kind of like the new elements and the sameness. Like the way that Fred put it is, shit's always been trying, right? It's like the tryingness, the kind of components of it shift, But there it is.
No, it's just to add one more thing. Just two more things to throw out, because Fred's such a well of just one-liners. But Fred said something like, "I don't know one Black person that didn't die from anti-Blackness." The other thing I remember, when the first time I met him in Chicago in 2015, and I recorded this whole talk, but it kind of stuck with me. And this kind of answers a previous question about making it. And Fred said something like, and this is, I'm trying to get as approximate as possible, but I think Fred said something like upward mobility is when you get closer and closer to the people who want to kill you. And so this idea of making it, and trying to get a seat at the table, whose table is it? Is that the house we want to be inside, or do we really want to try and think about something outside of that, the outside within the inside, as we continue to struggle through the whole. And so for me, this idea of making it isn't so much about arriving at a kind of institutional acknowledgement or visibility, but the idea of making is for me, making it is when me and my community survive, and we can thrive, and we can love, and we can get together and see another day. So that is in the very essence of making it for me to this day. So.
This won't be a question, although it used to be. Then we'll turn to audience questions. I know a lot about your Polaroid project. I don't know if the audience does. And I'm really interested in these notions of collection, of art, of archive, of social engagement, social practice when it comes to collecting these found images that are Polaroids and just other instant photos. But so what they make, and so for folks, we won't have time to go into a long conversation about it for y'all who are in the audience, but what they make me think about, and I'll just ask John to say just maybe a few sentences about what the project is, but what it makes me think about is Black life in this particular moment. And this may address this question above. Somebody asked the question about contextualizing this moment. If the four of you can talk about your years lived experience, and we've been starting to get at some of that, of your lived experience, have given you any perspective on what the world looks like now. I know many of us in the audience are college students, and I at least have been struggling with how to place this year in any sort of context. That's the question, right? But it brings me back to this particular moment, when we have a certain lens, a certain kind of video pornography of Black people being killed by police and others. And I think often about this. I think about my friend Ronaldo V. Wilson and his term neutral innocence, that's what's denied us as Black and brown people. This assumption of neutral innocence. And the image that comes to me is the shirtless white boy lying lazily at the swimming hole. And I think that what your images, the ones that you're collecting, those Polaroids do, is they show Black life on their own terms. Like it approximates, it's not necessarily neutral innocence, but there's some other term that I'm grappling to come up with. And the snapshot that's available immediately, and the way that image reveals something that this other lenses we've been talking about don't allow for.
Yeah, I mean, what I love about these images of, everyday Black life that were done in a sort of forest bias capacity is not just that they speak to self-representation, that's sort of the obvious first layer, but, what does it mean to construct a reality when that reality is, or what does it mean to construct a subjectivity when the very notion of subjectivity is, continues to be denied, and then, again, back to this idea of refusing the refusal, and insist on one that is formed after sort of a white neoliberal image, that never lets you arrive, period. But, what are the tools and knowledges and experiences that we know make sense for ourselves? And again, back to this question of what are the stories that we know are true for ourselves, and what is the work that we have to invest to make it so, And so again, eschewing this notion that this has to be done to respond to some outside deficiency or outside perception of deficiency, right? And then the reality that's constructed within, but then wrapped up and bound up in all of this is so people articulated that kind of fugitivity, but then they lost these images, right? So the structure won in some respects, some kind of battle to make sure that the images were no longer in possession of those that made them. So, and I very much wanted to also sit with that complication, the fact that the hold is always at work. And even though we can theorize and live an outside, we're still always on the inside. And that dichotomy never leaves us, and so I really want folks to get clear on, almost in a sense that DeCarava spoke about, that yes, there's something ecstatic and beautiful and I hate the word agency, but I'm going to use it here. It's a selfhood that comes into being, but that selfhood is always contested and should never be taken for granted. So the evidence of such a selfhood survives, but the question again, what happened to the bodies? What happened to the people, right? So, and allowing ourselves to even sit with the complication and still consider this as beautiful. This is really what I'm driving at, right? So a lot of people, when I talk about this work or when I show this work, they're really not interested in some of these questions. They just want to focus on beauty and Black family life and how beautiful it is. And but with that beauty comes also the slaughter. And so how does that kind of work in tandem, but not in a way that, reproduces trauma? And so, or in the words of, Elizabeth Alexander, can you be Black and look at this? What makes it so that we have to look at evidence of Black trauma? And what is the work that does? And sitting with that question, in a way that is not traumatizing, but speaks to what is unfolding. So really, it's again, that duality between the sweetness and the slaughter that I'm after, and addressing both at the same time.
So I'm going to pull on one of the questions from the audience. We have a number of them, but I will choose this one. What does Black joy, the type that conjures healing, community building, and imagining, mean to you tonight, lately?
I don't know. I keep going back to what you said, June, about sweetness and slaughter in juxtaposition, not necessarily in response to. I think we were looking at a still, or we just looked at an image. And this question is an interesting one to me, and one that I've heard in different ways these last months. And as a listener, somebody who's listening to these conversations or participating in conversations, something. How do I say this? Kevin Quashie talks about the is, like the is in the quiet, and I don't know. I feel like I sound like I'm being so abstract, but I mean this so deeply, like from my marrow. It is. I just think it is. Like it I'm trying. My friend Ross Gay was saying in response. In conversation, and there was a question similar, and he started to say, and maybe finished saying, I don't think it needs what is against Black joy to be, right? Like I just think it is, and so I'm not really answering your question about like what is it to me right now, because it feels like so many things, and it is, yeah.
I love that answer.
I love that answer. I keep thinking of this moment today where you were talking about turning to poetry and the imagination to get out of a difficult place, or like a challenging, like you're just like, I start using my poetic practice to sort of get the imagination turning. And I feel like one of the things that I've noticed is that in this moment in particular, because it's so hard, I'm surrounded by a lot of people that could only imagine the apocalypse or something terrible happening, and they see themselves as realists, and optimism or imaginative thinking or joy sort of looks like stupidity or lack of intellectual rigor. And I'm like, there's nothing more rigorous right now than using your imagination toward thinking of a way out of this place that could make you look a little crazy, because the reality looks so dark. But I do think that for me, that's what joy is right now. It's like staying within the imaginative space toward seeing that something else could possibly happen. And I do believe that when I'm around my people, I do feel that's possible.
I feel like we're your people.
Yeah, you're my people. Yeah, not the debate. You guys are my people. Anyway, June.
I wanted to actually offer up a passage from the Black Maria. So, and it's sort of the final passage where you, it's almost like an incantation, you know. It's like the poem dreams of bodies always leadless, bearing only things ordinary as water and light. And so for me, this articulates a kind of joy that is articulated through, you know, just being, you know, quiet is, joy is, but also saying what it is not, you know, leadless. I'm thinking not only in terms of free of bullets, but free of contaminated water, like in Flint or Newark, right? So, you know, the many ways, the big and small ways in which the structure insists itself, but also the big and small ways in which we can express something other, you know? So, you know, and, you know, there's a clip by Nina Simone where she's asked, what does freedom mean? And she says, no fear, you know, and even if there's brief moments in a day like today or tomorrow or November 3rd or November 4th, where we have a moment where we can look in the mirror and say, no fear, and stepping out into the world and showing up with your whole self, and not being afraid, you know, for me. And again, this doesn't have to be defiant and outward. It can be this quiet interiority that Kevin Quashie talks about, right? That articulates itself regardless. So for me, that's how I navigate moments of joy, when I'm not afraid. So.
Aracelis, would you, I'm going to give you the final word, which is, I want to ask you to read the poem from which the alter title of this event comes from. Would you read Ode to the Watermelon?
Sure. Shout out to Santa Ana, where this poem begins. Ode to the Watermelon. It is June at El Tacontento near 17th. The cook slices clean through the belly of a watermelon, sandia, dia santo, and honeybees grown in glistening temples dance away from their sugary hives, ants in lines, beetles toward your red. If you are east, they are going east, over and over, toward your worldly, luscious, blushed fruit freckled with seeds. Roadside, my obtuse pleasure, under strings of lights, a printed skirt and grocery barrels above park grasses on Sunday afternoon to the moan and dolorous moan of swings. Ripe conjugationer of water and sun, your opening calls even the birds to land. And in Palestine, where it is a crime to wave the flag of Palestine in Palestine, watermelon halves are raised against Israeli troops for the red, black, white, green of Palestine. Forever I love you, your color hemmed by rind, the blaring juke and wet of it. Black seed star red immense as poppy fields, white to outsing jasmine. Again, all that green. Sandia, Dia Santo, summer's holy, earthly bandera of the ground, language of fields. Even under a blade, you swing your quiet scent in the pendulum of any gale. Men bow their heads open-mouthed to coax the sugar from beneath your work dress. Women lift you to their teeth. Sandia, Dia Santo, yours is a sweetness to outlast slaughter. Tongues will lose themselves inside you, scattering seeds. All over, the land will hum with your wild, raucous blooming.
Thank you. I want to thank you, Aracelis, Zun, Angie for co-moderating. I want to thank the audience for coming again tonight. And I just want to say to this group that this has been a kind of emotionally rigorous experience for me. Thank you for bringing your whole selves. Thank you, Zun, for the invitation to the table at the coffee house. Everyone who's in the audience, please join. Tomorrow is the day of thinking and creativity. There are prompts on the website that you can do all day, but also Lyrae Van Cleef Stefanon is leading a workshop based on everything that she's learned this week so far. I believe that workshop is at what time? 2:00. Is that right? So you should register for that. Resist, thrive, experience joy. Good night. It's at 1:00.
Yes.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you so much.